Tom Craig and A.A. Gill have worked together for a long time, and they're one of very few long-standing partnerships combining word and image. I'm sure you can think of a few others, and historically there have been some interesting precedents, but it's a rare thing. But if a writer and a photographer know each other well, they know what images can do and can't do, and they know what words can do and can't do, then you've got a good chance of coming up with something that is more than the sum of its parts, rather than less. So we're here on the occasion of quite an unusual exhibition, largely organised by Tom, where his photographs will be combined with some of Adrian's writings. They've worked together for a long time. We were trying to work it out. Nine years. Yeah. Over 20 assignments, 15 different countries. I'd like, if it's possible, to get not to the bottom, but to at least explore why the combination of these two works so well. We'll hear from them as they talk about each of their own skills and their approaches to the assignments. Tom's put together 2 slideshows, a kind of an official one, and then if we have time, there's a slightly less official one at the end. The 2 will take up the first 45 minutes or so, and then we can have much more of an open discussion. Don't think I need to say anything else at the beginning. Over to you, Tom.
Well, good evening. I think the best place for me to start is to try and describe what it was that I was thinking about when I wanted to put the exhibition together. And to an extent, I was becoming disillusioned with the imagery. David was talking about the combination of writing and pictures, but talking specifically about the imagery, I was becoming disillusioned specifically with the imagery that I was seeing appearing in the news and feature print media. And the reason for that was I felt that increasingly individual photographers were going to places with very specific agendas. And by that I mean they had a story in mind that they wanted to photograph before they got there. And even if they got there and they didn't necessarily achieve those sort of specific goals, they could kind of freewheel and produce a set of pictures that was then supplied to sort of various magazines. And I think that it's a ever so slightly kind of dangerous position to be in, because it represents a place whereby it's very difficult to be impartial. You're not necessarily getting feedback as you go as a photographer. What you're really trying to do is make the sort of strongest and most impactful images. And they're not necessarily the ones that tell the whole story. And what I learned as I went along, particularly working with Adrian, was that the point of view and the experience and the voice of 2 journalists or 2 observers, 2 storytellers, you can call it whatever you will, working away in the same location at the same time, gave for what I hoped was a really credible end point. And by that I mean that one point of view could validate another, and one point of view could actually prove to the readership, to the world, to the viewers, that actually what you were getting was a really credible and authentic document. And I think that's really, really important in this day and age. I feel like it's difficult to trust all of the stuff that we see and all of the stuff that we get to observe in the press. On one extreme end, it's vulnerable to a sense of sort of retouching, and on the other personal end, it's vulnerable to a sense of a young photographer who really wants to have their pictures in a magazine, taking a point of view which is just about getting the very strongest single images and having them published, sometimes to their own personal gain, which is, you know, a very big and significant driving force in any young sort of photojournalist. And I found it a very grounding and rewarding and also interesting practice to be somewhere and work together specifically with someone. And I discovered in trying to curate this show and look back over the work that I'd done and I'd shot specifically working with Adrian, was to find some photographs that struck a chord in terms of what we noticed when we were making the feature, but also photographs that, or moments in time, should I say, that must have struck a chord with Adrian, because I realized later that through the words that he wrote and the pictures that I took, when you combined the two, you did really get, all I can describe it as is a document. It's a moment in time, and it's verified not by the fact that there's an image that exists, but there's also an account that exists. And sometimes you can observe a picture and it's wide open to ambiguity, and you can misinterpret that image if that image is there to tell a story on its own. But if you have the opportunity to see an image that is reinforced, corroborated, backed up, emphasized by a body of writing that's made at the same time, then suddenly you have something that I believe to be verifiable, to be meaningful, and also really essential in this day and age. I think it's essential that we have something that we can trust in. And what I've tried to do just in making this little slideshow is to show some images, and I've put them together with very short bits of text that Adrian's written, because I don't want you to have to sit there and read off the screen. But they highlight, in a nutshell, like a picture that I was proud of, that I felt represented a time and a place, and some words that very specifically relate to that. So I wonder maybe the best thing is for me to
go for it.
Forward.
That's a dreadful picture. You see, my words were so much better than that. Because you don't know. So can I just start, before I go on, how many people in here are photographers? How many hacks? Yeah, we're severely
And how many do both?
But my words for that's the early warning system that used to give us the 4-minute warning in Greenland. That was it. That was the Cold War. That was when that went off. We got 4 minutes to fill the bath and paint all our windows white. But you wouldn't know it by looking at it, would you? You'd think it was a bit of a wind farm. I'm the bloke over there, by the way. Go on then.
We know a bit more about it because of what you wrote, fortunately.
But no.
Oh, I love that. I love that picture. No, I have that picture on my wall at home. That. Oh, Tom, do you want to tell them what that is?
No, you go for it.
That we went out seal hunting, and with an old bloke in a plastic boat off Greenland, off Amasilik, and it was bloody cold, and he just went out shooting baby seals in the face to feed to his dogs, and the seals kept coming back. If you missed, they keep coming back because they keep going, what was that? Oh, grow up. Anyway, that's the smear of blood in when you get ice flows, the water is incredibly still. It's like a mill pond, and that's the shadow of blood from a dead baby seal.
I like the fact that Adrian's going on about the blueness and Tom's going on about the pinkness.
Well, that was interesting. Tom.
Well, I'd like to think that I don't have to explain them. It's taken in Albania, but the idea to an extent is that you see the picture and you make what you want of it. And obviously, like I said, there are a lot more words that go alongside these experiences. But I think in a nutshell, I'm just trying for the sake of the slideshow to show you what I believe in, which is that the power of the image and the written word are great on their own, but they're a lot greater when they're combined. And I think that when it's right, that's indisputable. That's what I believe. This was in Tasmania.
This was a great evening. We were sitting up waiting for Tasmanian devils. We just out of the frame, this is all dead things. Just out of the frame there is a wombat that's been staked out to attract the devils. And do you remember the wombats had their bollocks on the wrong way round?
Yeah.
Anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyway, this was the place where they'd set up for Tom to put his camera and the lights. It was it's the North Shore of Tasmania. Absolutely fantastic place. We had a very good abalone stew. Next one.
We'll get on to food later.
I think this is. I'm going to talk about this because this is exactly what I love about Tom's photographs, is that you wouldn't know what that was, but you know that there's something uneasy about it. That has a sort of Andrew Wyeth feeling to it. It's this strange sense of a sort of a hidden agenda. Something's happened just outside the picture, or something is about to happen. It's full of the sort of emotion that most picture editors won't use now, and most photographers don't think it's worth submitting. And actually, this is the field where more Englishmen died in a battle in the whole of our history. The Battle of Toten, which not many people know about, and this is a boy who's part of a reenactment society. And that's the field, and you can feel it. You'd never know, but you can feel it.
I read this morning, reread it, and your piece is full of extraordinarily rich amount of historical detail. I mean, you were clearly gripped by the story of that battle, and that something like, if the equivalent population had died today, it would be something like 600,000 people died in one day. And Tom's pictures are these super gentle, super restrained, super open pictures. You know, if you'd forced a picture into some great rhetorical flourish of melodrama, it would have killed it stone dead. So I imagine that you're permitted to take these much more open pictures because you know Adrian is going to fill it in. Yeah?
So,
permitted is the word I like there.
Yeah, sure. But I suppose the point in that case is that I'm at an advantage because I can tell the quieter story, because there are other things that I know are going to be given around that picture. That's very true.
But we have very few rules about travelling together and doing the stories together. But one rule we have is that we always both see everything.
You don't separate.
We never ever separate. So we're always, and we talk constantly. I talk constantly about what the story is going to be. Yeah. And occasionally Tom will say, do you think this is important? Do you think this is going to be something? And I'll say, actually, why don't you get that? Because I have a feeling that's going to be important. But the best thing about them is that that's it. And then Tom makes his choice. He edits his pictures, and I get on and write mine. And they've got to the point where they work perfectly. When they do work, they work perfectly in tandem, and they're complementary. But I'm never writing picture captions for his pictures, and he's never illustrating. Yeah. The worst thing to read in a magazine is to have a description of something and then the thing that's been described. Yeah. And they're never like that. They're always as well as, and that's that's incredibly rare.
It is rare. It is rare. quite a lot of the time, a photographer, apart from the editing, a photographer's work is being done in the taking of the pictures. But I imagine that a lot of your work has to go on, Adrian, afterwards.
Well, everything. I mean, I don't write anything when we're out. I mean, I rarely take notes. I mean, I don't do any research. I don't read any books. I don't do interviews. I don't go and talk to the foreign desk. I don't go and see the ambassador or the minister or the knowledgeable expat. I mean, I don't want. I mean, otherwise, I think was what you said about what Tom said. You said about going out and having a picture in your head and having a story in your head. I mean, the less I have in my head, the better. And I don't want someone else's view of what it is I'm going to see, because you end up being like an I Spy catalogue. You tick off. People say, you have to see the church. You have to go and see, and I don't want to do that. I mean, I think the important thing is that we always feel slightly lost. I mean, you should always feel slightly on the back foot. I never want a story to be familiar. And one of the problems, I think, photographers and hacks work at really different speeds, and we have really different needs. And one of the reasons I really like working with Tom is that I always get my way.
Because he doesn't get in your way.
No, when I say we're going, we're going. Yeah. And when he says, I want to wait for, whatever you call it, magic hour or thingy, or this will be brilliant at 5 o'clock, well, tough.
I have to sneak back before breakfast.
I'm bored with him now. Can we have something else?
Well, on the subject of him and some of the others,
I like that.
Amused.
I love that. It was such a good story. That was just St. Paul's. The story was just St. Paul's. And it was brilliant. And only because St. Paul's is so brilliant. And it had been there under our noses all our lives. And
was this your idea, or was it a
I can't remember.
mission? Can you tell us a bit about that? Are some of these things your ideas?
never been in St. Paul's.
I'd never been. That was one of the things. I'd never been in it. I'd lived in London pretty much all my life. I'd never been in St. Paul's. I can't remember whose story. The stories all come from different places. Sometimes they're Tom's. If they're Tom's, they're usually unwritable. Photographers always come up with stories that are unwritable. So I've got this great story, Adrian, and there's one day a year on some Pacific island there's going to be an exploding volcano, and the natives all have their fecundity dance, and you go, that's a picture. Was the story. And you go, oh, well, no, but you can make up something about that.
So you don't go there?
No. But I don't, but often, I mean, it'll be the other way around, and I'll say, I want to do this, and Tom goes, oh, I don't know, that's just going to be a lot of blokes sitting in chairs. But St. Paul's was wonderful. And this was the St. Paul's choir, the schoolboys, before they go in to sing. And that's me batting.
Yeah, what's with the Where's Wally thing that seems to go on in a lot of the...
I have nothing to do with that. That's entirely him.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, I have several copies of the Sunday Times here, and you can have a look for yourselves. The number of times it becomes this Spot Adrian competition. Somewhere.
The actual practice of going about the assignment is a really key issue, because it's a very, very restless experience. I don't really know what it's like. I've worked with other writers, but definitely not for as long or as often. And I know that we're not necessarily going to any city or village or place in the country, and this great scene is going to reveal itself. So my ambition is to try to get an image that I feel is atmospheric, that I feel conveys some sense of that place, particularly in the context of the story. And Towton, the previous picture of the War of the Roses battlefield, is quite an interesting example, because you get a call that says, will you go to a field, 300 miles from London, and make a picture? You've got to shoot a cover, you've got to shoot a double page opener, and you've got to shoot another 2 pictures in the inside. And your first reaction, my first reaction is, you know, what on earth am I going to photograph? You know, is it wheat? Is it corn? Is it fallow? I mean, there's not a lot when you just wander into a field that had some significance 600 years before that you can count on to be there. And so actually, when that boy and his mate rocked up from the pub in his medieval tunic, I was thinking, great, thank God for something, you know, here that I can kind of work with. And then as I spoke to them, we were talking about how the Yorkists and the Lancastrians lined up. And it's very strange to imagine how anyone can figure out how it worked. But then when someone talks to you and they know what they're talking about, it's incredible, because all you've got to do is go around with a metal detector, and the arrowheads alone will show you exactly how the two sides lined up. And then you get onto the subject of, well, what else did you find? And the guy said to me, and it was bitterly cold and the wind was blowing, and he said, the most common thing that we find here on this site are arrowheads and fingers. Yeah. Because as you're holding your staff and the opposition comes towards you, you're freezing cold, and the guy runs his pike, sword, dagger, whatever, down the shaft of the pike that you're holding, and you drop your pike and you look down and wonder why, and you realise that all your fingers have popped off. And that's it. The place is littered with arrowheads and fingers, and the guy's telling me this, and suddenly I'm thinking, God, it's completely haunted.
Hold on to your camera.
This place is completely haunted. You know, 7 or 8% of the male population of the country died in a couple of hours. And so then I set myself this task to try and get something that embodies, at least in part, how I felt. And it's not an empty field, and I'm grateful for the boy for that. But there's something else about it, and I hope there's something about the other pictures too. And this is another example of it, whereby what I'm trying to do is take what I've described for the purpose of this show as the bigger picture, and it's an image that encapsulates something. It encapsulates a sense of atmosphere or a sense of place at a particular time. This was 2 days after Iceland completely imploded, and there was this incredible, you know, this Reykjavik, which is one of the most fun cities in the world, was like a morgue. And this guy in the bus shelter just struck me as someone that sort of epitomised how I felt they must be actually feeling. And that's what I would describe as this scene.
Tom likes shooting the back of people's heads a lot.
It's true. There we go. Can't resist it.
I love this picture.
This part of the slideshow just represents the other images that are in the exhibition. And I didn't want to put the words with all of them, just perhaps show some of the pictures. This is oddly one of the few pictures in the whole show that represents a sort of pure photographic moment, only in a very subtle way, which is the boy diving off the platform in the background. And as Adrian was saying about not having a specific knowledge about a place, I knew nothing about Albania, and in the short amount of time that I was there, this particular scene struck me as being really Albanian, and actually this photograph has sort of lived with me since. And of all of the pictures in the show, there are a number that I'm particularly proud of, and this is one of them, and I would even find it hard to describe to you exactly why, but I know how I felt at the time, and I know what these guys were like, and this sort of leathery, sun-beaten skin, and these guys sitting on old cardboard boxes like they'd been shoved out of their houses by their wives in the morning. They weren't allowed back until the end of the day, and it was a sort of sense of pleasure and boredom and just guys gassing in the park, basically, and that's how it felt. And you imagined that for the moment it was sunny at the beginning of spring, right up until the first cold day of fall, that's what they were doing. And
if you go back a sec, I mean, what strikes me about that is that very open, all over kind of picture where the kind of eye roams across the figures and the gestures. Is very like Adrian's prose, which often starts with a scene description, and then there's this picking out of the significant unexpected detail. And I'm not saying that's a formula, but that happens a lot.
No, that's a formula.
It is a formula. And that photographically, that's a very similar. That the viewer is allowed to do something very similar with that kind of picture, and you have quite a few a little bit like that in your in the photo stories, which is. I mean, they require a certain kind of size, don't they? Those.
Well, that's why they're often not published, because they need to go at least across a page and a half to sort of make sense. And a lot of these pictures have fallen on the sort of cutting room floor, and I hope are being revived by this particular opportunity. But to take a very literal picture that smacks you in the face is reasonably immediate and not that difficult when you're a working photographer on the ground, to find someone with a leathery face and photograph them, full frame and sharp on the eyes and the hands and the drama and, the flashpoints of the story. It's relatively commonplace, I think, but the moments that speak about a place in time I find more challenging, and that's what I look for. And in fact, the next place, which is the Avenue of the Baobabs in Madagascar, is, in my mind, one of the world's great sorts of wonders. But what the JCB was sort of doing, lining up to plough them all down, I don't know.
Well, we paid it to be there, that's why.
Believe what you want.
I'm the one on the left.
Yeah, we can recognise you.
We'll come back to the Arctic later in some of the other pictures that I've got that are sort of behind the scenes of the stories. But this was in search of a polar bear up in Svalbard.
You met David Attenborough, who said, "Why the hell are you going there?"
Yeah, I met him at a thing, and I thought I'd show off. And I said, "Oh, David, we're off to Svalbard." And he said, "When?" I said, "Next week." And he went, "Oh my God, I wouldn't go there." It was bloody cold. It was bloody cold.
It wasn't the cold that he was referring to, was it?
No, he said it was quite dangerous as well. But I said I had you.
And he said he was.
I always put you next to the door.
And he said he was going to Richmond.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
This was taken on our first assignment that we worked on together, actually, which was Chad, and it was the plight of the refugees coming over from Sudan, being forced out by the Janjaweed over the border into Chad. And I'll talk a little bit more about Chad again later in terms of it being a particularly difficult place to work in terms of the physical sort of constraints, particularly the heat. But the thing to me that's interesting about this image is that there are really no men in it. I mean, there are hundreds and almost maybe thousands of people. It certainly feels that way in this image. But there are no men, and not really any boys either. And the reason is because they're all over the border, either being killed or fighting against, the Janjaweed who are trying to force them out. And for me, it's a sort of subtle way of trying to tell that same story.
And this is a very typical Tom picture, is that refugee camps are fraught with cliche images. You can always find a malnutrition child who's about to die. You can always find people with flies in their eyes. There are just a whole lot of things which are the stock images. It doesn't make them any less real or any less dramatic or any less sad, but they are the go-to images for news pages, and they're often what editors want. And this picture of the women queuing up for water has all of the sort of the dusty, bright hopelessness of refugee camps, but it's also incredibly colourful. And they were very colourful. These women still had these beautiful clothes on, and they made sure that they looked good. And there's a lot about their dignity in getting on and doing the things they have to do. It isn't about victims. It's about people in a place at a time who are having a bad time. But they aren't victimized by the camera. And that's something you see a lot, and it's something we've come to expect. and that the camera looks powerful and the person in the frame looks weak. And Tom never does that. The people in the pictures always have their dignity and and particularly women. And I don't think I've ever said that to you before, have I?
No, you haven't, thanks.
You don't like that one, do you? It's a bit cliche.
I prefer that.
I love that one. I saw that picture. I had to call him back to take that picture. He wanted to go and have lunch. He'd had enough. This is
sunrise.
No, it isn't. It isn't. We were going to for lunch. This is on the Bosphorus. This is Istanbul.
As you can tell, we never argue. It wasn't lunchtime.
It's a great picture, that.
Was that one run, Tom, or not?
No.
No, most of these never get published. That's the other thing.
Next year I'll do a show.
I have to stop him taking this picture over and over again. You tell them why you like this.
Well, everyone believes that this image is fake, and I can tell you now that it's completely as is. This is what I discovered when I came around the corner. There's a place that everyone goes, with good reason, in the middle of Istanbul, because you have the Hagia Sophia on one side and the Blue Mosque on the other. And actually the dilemma as a photographer is which way do you point your camera? And we were doing a story for the New York Times magazine and had been through this spot certainly 3, maybe 4 times in the course of the assignment, and nothing had worked out for me. And I came around the last morning of the assignment. I think we were leaving that day. And lo and behold, there was a camera class going on. And I love the fact that, lots of people apparently pointing their camera in the wrong direction. Sort of the caption might be, "It's behind you,"
Did you take the reverse shot too?
No.
If I hadn't stopped him, he'd have been there all day. Is that the one thing Tom really, really loves is pictures of people taking pictures. And that's got everything. It's got the backs of somebody's head, and it's somebody taking pictures.
Well, maybe I'll move on. But I think there's 25 of them in this picture, and I've never beaten that.
If you're going to do a cliche, really do it.
Exactly.
Are we done now?
Not exactly, no.
Oh. Do you want to ask them if they want to ask any questions?
No, not yet.
Oh, okay.
I'm chairing.
When people know that I work with Adrian, the first thing they normally ask me is like, "I bet you get to stay in some nice hotels, don't you?"
And eat good food.
And the second one is, "And eat good food." I've put together a few pictures which have very limited photographic merit.
That isn't actually the first thing people ask you, is it? What people first of all ask you always is he as awful as he sounds?
No comment.
He's got no pictures to prove that.
I do. So on the eve of the more revealing, and slightly more informal set of pictures, I don't know whether, if anyone at this point has anything to talk about specifically about the exhibition. These pictures represent more about the sort of work in practice and a life on the road.
We haven't seen the exhibition yet. Let's see.
Go on.
So the first image was taken in Chad, and it was really quite an epic moment because I looked back through my pictures of Chad in preparing for this show, and I realised it's quite odd because I remember it as being insanely hot, and it was 49 or 50 degrees, and I remember looking through the pictures in the last week or so wondering what I'm going to pick out, and there's no sweat stains on anyone's clothes. And the reason is because sweat doesn't even survive in Chad. Like the moment it tries to squeeze itself out of your body, it's gone. I mean, it's gone.
It was 53 degrees. Do you remember that guy's thermometer broke at 53 degrees?
It was unbearable. I mean, at 5 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, it was 39, 40 degrees. The heat was completely inescapable. without question, the hottest place that I've been in my life. And you felt that the juice around your brain was overheating to the extent that it might just start sort of bubbling. Very strange things start to happen when it's that hot for that long, and you know, you don't have any particular way of cooling yourself down. And there was a crisis going on, and so we were afforded little or no privileges, but we got to a place called Tinne, where we met a Dutch nurse, and she had snuck one bottle of Fanta into the medical fridge. It was the only fridge that was, it was the only appliance in the entire town that was allowed to have electricity. And she'd snuck a bottle of Fanta in, and this, as it turned out, apparently, this bottle of Fanta was unbelievably cold and just like a godsend. And she, who'd been working there for months, chose in an incredible act of generosity to give it to us. And I wondered whether I'd remembered right as to who got the bottle of Fanta. And then I found this picture.
She was really, really pretty. And you took a picture of me and not her.
Well, I'm glad now. Just referring to the hotels and like how we exist out and about in a place like that, you really sort of get what you can, where you can, in terms of where you sleep and what you can eat. And that was our sleeping arrangement in Chad, I remember, which was the mud courtyard of the MSF compound.
And you remember, they'd all gone native.
Yeah,
they just were drunk in a corner.
From the extremely hot to the extremely cold. The next one is from the Arctic, where it was -35.
Oh, it was published, that one, no?
This, I think it's unlikely.
I think it's in the Sunday Times.
It was.
Yeah.
It was at this point. This was in the middle of the night. We were in the tent. This is inside the tent, obviously, and there's been a gale blowing. So I think by this time it's got to below -40 because of the wind chill, and the gale is piling snow on top of the tent. And there's Tom and I are both in there. Obviously, he took the picture, and I'm thinking it'll be like an igloo. It'll get warmer. The snow and Tom, bless him, got a little bit scaredy cat. And he was lying in his sleeping bag going, "Adrian, I think the tent's collapsing." I go, No. It's just the snow. It'll be insulators. It'll be fine. Read your book. And and then I put my hand up to push the snow off to reassure him so he could get some sleep. And it was like concrete. It was absolutely solid. You couldn't move it, and the tent roof had come. Do you remember it done like that? And the wind outside makes a noise exactly like a train in a tunnel. You can barely talk over it. It was fantastic. It was really elemental, and then after about 2 or 3 hours, a Norwegian came and dug us out. You so always need to travel with a Norwegian. Anyway, that's me being reassuring.
Highly reassuring. That was in Haiti.
That's Haiti, isn't it? That was dreadful. That was that's a fucking awful story.
This was in the tiny little galley of.
Where's that? Oh, that's the Fisherman.
Trawler.
Where is this?
He didn't like me.
It was on the North Sea. Are you pointing at both of them?
Oh, that was lovely. I found a wedding ring in my tent there. That's Madagascar. That's the central spine, the highlands of Madagascar. That was a fantastic place.
What's the longest you've been away together?
don't know. We don't. That's the other thing, is that the stories are always very short. Is that I want them always to be about the surface of things. I mean, I know I'm not a deep writer, and I mean I'm pretty shallow about everything, and so I write about the gloss and the instant, the feeling, the smell, the look, and you know, if it's any more complicated than that, I don't want to know, and so I like to work very hard, very intensely, for a very short period of time, which is almost exactly the opposite of what photographers want.
You said the working speed was quite different, but do you then have to try and write quite quickly once you're back?
No, I try and wait a couple of weeks.
Really?
So I just let it sit and filter and sort of settle, and then I'll talk about it to people, so people say, where have you been, and I'll bore them rigid. And as I'm talking it, you can see, I know which bits are connected, which bits are good stories and which bits to and so that's sort of, I begin to edit a shape, and then you start, I don't know what I do really.
At the beginning of the story, actually, we were travelling with some botanists, seed collectors from Kew, and we went to a guest house, and the first night, I think, we were in a sort of bunkhouse with 7 or 8 botanists, which wasn't an experience I particularly wanted to repeat. That's Adrian looking very disdainfully at the man who just sort of spat toothpaste on his Prada safari shoes.
If we're going to talk about nonsense kit.
No. I've got a little subsection of kit for you. The next picture.
We were saying before we started that it might be that Tom's actually a fashion photographer, masquerading.
Yeah, I mean, we could get all Tom's Vogue covers in soon.
The next picture is very rare, probably the rarest I've ever taken, because it's a photograph of Adrian putting up a tent. That's him. It didn't last that long, I don't think.
I don't think I got any further than that, actually.
On the subject of camping, just going back to the Arctic, because it was an amazing story in the way that it unfolded. This was the evening that we arrived at camp, and we had to dig you had to set the camp and dig the toilets and put the mess tent in and everything. And this was, at the end of the day, where we all felt sort of, ready for a break, I suppose. We'd done it, we'd got there, we were looking forward to this adventure of looking for the polar bears. And what's really of note in this photograph is the blue tent at the back left, because that turned out to be the mess tent where 14 of us slept and lived for 5 or 6 days, almost without going outside, because no sooner had we set camp, the weather changed, and this was the scene just a couple of days later. And the pole on the right is the sort of pole you use after an avalanche to find stuff, and we've just found this tent, and we are trying to dig out the kit. There isn't anyone in there, but all their kit's in there, and the tent's long since collapsed, and that happened halfway through the assignment. And just to go back, the blue tent is where we all lived. None of the tents that we set were habitable halfway through the assignment. And by the end of the assignment, this was the tent that we lived in, the mess tent.
He was fantastic. Ian, how do you pronounce his name?
He couldn't even pronounce his name.
He was a man of few words, and one of the few that he didn't have was his own name. And but he was the hardest man. Even his hair had given up. He'd skied across Greenland. Now Greenland has 4 time zones and no maps.
Sorry to interrupt. That was his holiday.
Yes, it wasn't his day job. Exactly. He'd skied across 4 time zones in a place that he's so blank that no one has ever bothered to do a map of it. And he dragged everything he needed behind him on skis. And I said, what was it? Because we're in here, all we're doing is telling stories. I know how all of these people lost their virginity. We tell any old stories. What was your first pet like? Anything but that. And I thought, fantastic, this will keep us going way past dinner. I skied alone across Greenland. And I said, what was it like? And he said, hard. And I said, what was the most exciting thing that happened? He said, one day a little bird landed beside my tent. I gave it a crumb to eat. It flew away. And that was it. That was my anecdote of skiing across Greenland. Brilliant.
He was totally unfazed. He just felt survival was
He really does
sort
look
of
like
due
he's
to
out
him.
of central casting.
The man in the back left actually had neglected to tell the organisers that he had a serious heart problem and was dosed up to the nines on sort of beta blockers, which he ran out of halfway through the trip.
The point of this story, I should tell you, is that this was the first this was a first tourist group to be taken to this bit of the Arctic. So
It's posh.
yeah, it's piston.
Still cold.
But it was so the rest of the people, there were 4 people there who were tourists. And they were that's Flaere's just had a baby, you know. Anyway, go on.
It was very windy.
They're leaning against the wind.
The other people, the other question that I get asked a lot, I suppose because of Adrian's association with food, is what we eat and what it's like. So I've put just a couple of snaps in of some of the meals. This probably, without question, the most disgusting of all time ever. That's in the middle, sort of wet bear crackling, that's polar bear fat. There's bear meat there, and there's
This in the front, which is like the crisscross down, is seal fat, is seal blubber still attached to the skin.
Shark fermented in its own piss.
Yeah. and that green thing is the only green vegetable that grows in Greenland, in the Arctic, in Greenland, and you don't know why it bothers. Okay.
What's next? Oh, snails in Algeria. There's the seal being skinned, one of the many seals in Greenland. If you thought those were bad, this is ghee. This is in India.
That was fantastic.
No, this was one of the...
I was so ill when we ate that.
You didn't eat it. You made me eat it. It's ghee with ghee. That white streak is just pure butter. It's bread fried in butter and rice fried in butter and curry with butter. I mean, it's butter with butter. It was heart-stopping. After the crash in Iceland, everyone said, "Oh, we'll go back to fishing, and we'll go back to the traditional foods that we used to have as children."
This is delicious, by the way.
It's
It
not.
is. This is really good.
That's basically an Icelandic haggis that we're eating on the bonnet of a car outside a co-op in Reykjavik. And it does look like shit, but tastes like piss. It's completely sort of renal. It's very, very not to be recommended.
I loved that. And also, what I liked about it was that you got it out of the hot cabinet in the garage. It was very good. This is a very, very nice sealskin coat, by the way.
That's
Where
some
is
mass
that?
meal that by the botanists.
Oh,
in
that was
Madagascar.
disgusting. You think botanists would know how to cook vegetables, wouldn't you? What's that?
Kind of a frugal affair in...
Oh, I know, that's
Chad.
Chad. That was my bottle holder.
I'm getting a bit arty there. That's better.
No, sorry. That's beans and cheese in the Arctic.
Yeah.
This was a good meal. That was sort of a Malay meal in Madagascar. Istanbul, that was a good one. And just quickly onto the kit. It's hard to talk about these stories without touching on the kit. There's always a lot of kit. Slightly competitive edge to who's got the best kit. Does occasionally creep into the experience of doing the assignments. That was my camera bag in the Arctic. I try to remember sometimes what cameras I do take on these assignments, and I found this picture, which is of note only because it's me, but what I've got in my left hand is a 5x4 plate camera. And I still think to myself, what the fuck was I thinking? It was hard enough to walk, you know, just down the road, let alone trying to go and shoot the assignment on with these 5x4 plates. And
look how thin you were then.
yeah. That was in climbing in the Madagascar.
That was a single. I was knackered there.
The only picture I could find, actually, of the two of us on all the assignments. Take note, Adrian's got his outfit completely sorted out there. The North Sea I haven't talked about much, but I didn't particularly enjoy it. That's sort of how I felt, I remember. And
It's a good story, though.
the last one is actually maybe a story that Adrian wants to tell, but one of my absolute favourites, which is a lady we met in Greenland.
I didn't know you were going to show this. We were in Greenland, and well, the guy came up and said, "You've got your interview in half an hour." And I went, "No, I don't need an interview." And he went, "No, it's in your itinerary. You want to interview somebody." And I went, "Oh, okay." So we went into this woman. She wasn't dressed like this. We went into this woman's house and sat down. She was a nice lady in this rather sort of for Greenland. That's very sort of, Surbiton, and so we sat down and she bought us a drink and we started having this sort of rather one lump or two conversation, and I wanted to get out because there were things I needed I wanted to go and do, and I had forgotten to ask what it was I was supposed to be asking her. So I was interviewing someone and I had no idea why. And she sat there very politely waiting for me to ask her the germane question, which would be why it was this terrible fishing, because I was just hoping that she hadn't actually been raped by American Marines or something. Well, she was quite close, but anyway, what she was this. She was a shamanistic dancer. And there isn't an awful lot of culture well, there is a lot of culture, but there's not a lot of cultural artifacts in Greenland. They just don't. There's not a lot to do, and not a lot to do it with, and you spend a lot of time fishing. And anyway, but what they do is they have this sort of singing and storytelling, and it's, as far as I can see, it's always the same story. It's about not laughing. It's about a witch who hides behind the moon and comes out and tells you a joke. And if you laugh, she eats your bowels. See, you're all dead. And to make you laugh, she pulls faces. And
bowel devouring is funny.
and she did it with this drum, and we were in her little front room, and she said, "Well, would you like me to do the drumming?" And I went, "Yeah, I'll do a little bit," because I just thought none of this is going in, none of this is any use. Just give us a little drum, why don't you? And so she did her drum. She said, "Would you like me to put on my outfit?" And I went, "I don't think there's any need. No, I don't want to put you to any trouble." She said, "No, I'd love to." And she came back in the complete sealskin onesie with the hot pants. And I was sitting on one side and Tom was on the other. And I knew I couldn't catch his eye. And I started laughing so badly. And so until I had snot streaming out of my nose. And I was weeping silently and rocking. And I could feel Tom radiating hilarity from over there. And then she started, I mean, I won't even begin to try and imitate Greenland singing. It's unlike anything you've ever heard on Radio 3. And then she started pulling the faces, and at that point, I just had to let go. Look at the picture of that. Always culturally sensitive.
Are we done? Is that the final one? Look, we have time for comments and questions, but there is a roving mic. I'm told it's being streamed live. Watch your P's and Q's.
Adrian, you said that you don't do research before you go to find your stories or to write the stories. So how does it work? Are you incepted by information, or how do you?
Well, you can't unknow what you already know. So there are a few places where you really don't know anything at all. But I try not to lumber myself with a lot of other people's ideas. I mean, generally we're going for a story for something. So there's a reason for going. We very rarely go to somewhere and someone just says, why don't you just go and see what it's like? I mean, there's usually an event or a thing, or something's happened, or obviously in somewhere like Haiti, there's a huge event. But I want the story to be what the story is. I mean, we're there to tell the truth, and we're the truth as we find it, not as we've been told we ought to expect it.
That requires a real openness.
Laziness.
No, a kind of... You've got to be super receptive to do it that way.
Well, we wouldn't be journalists if we...
No, but let's say if we compare it to someone who's after a particular story, wants the facts, wants to see this person, wants to see that person. There's a big risk in what you do. That
I did a story, but not with Tom, but before, about Germany, and I didn't actually take again Germany, but there were things Germany and I didn't get on agree about, and one of the things I wrote about Germany was that I'd been to Buchenwald, and there is a cafe in the middle of Buchenwald with a children's playground in it, and I just thought anyone who wants to go and have a frothy coffee and let their kids play in a concentration camp needs to be German, and I then got an incredibly angry, not just a letter, a piece was written in the Times by the Times' Bonn, as it was then, Bonn correspondent, who, furious that I had taken such a cheap shot at the Germans, and he said, Adrian was only here for 9 days, and this is, if you're only in a place for 9 days, then I suppose this is the sort of, simplistic view you get. I've been here for 9 years, and I know that the story of Germany is that it takes you 3 months to get a telephone connected. And you go, that's why I don't spend 9 years. Because that really isn't the story.
Wait for the mic.
Hi. Just wondering, you mentioned in your book, Adrian, about how certain places like Japan that you really, really did not enjoy the experience.
Yeah.
Do you ever go back to a place the second time round and have a radically different experience?
A different experience, yes. I had a very different experience in Germany. Tom and I went and did a story in Germany, in southern Germany. We went, one of the nicest trips, one of the nicest stories we've done. I think one of the best stories we've done. And I think actually one where I didn't write it very well. But we travelled the length of the Danube. And it was a terrific unfolding of a bit of Europe that actually we tend not to go to as tourists, but is just fantastic. And I went back and I thought almost everything I thought about Germany, I was rubbed out by how much I loved southern Germany and how great it was. Japan I've never been back to. I really didn't like Japan. I mean, I find it very, very uncomfortable. It's very like a dystopian Britain. I mean, all the things, they're very like ours, only weird. And yes, I do sometimes go, we did a piece in Dubai, which there's some marvellous pictures of, and for Vanity Fair, and they, as that issue of Vanity Fair got to Dubai, the customs officers tore the article out of Vanity Fair, which rather proved everything I'd said about the bloody place. Anyway, I had to fly through it the other day on their airline, and the person who was doing I was on the job, and the person mentioned that my piece hadn't been, best liked. And I was sitting in Dubai in the lounge, and the came over the tannoy. Would Mr. Adrian Gill please come to? And I actually had this moment. I thought, that's it. They're going to Velcro me to a camel. And there was just that moment when when you're flying and you're a bit sort of edgy anyway. And I just thought, and I was with Nicola and our children, and I just thought, oh God, I better give them their passports. And so I went to the desk, and the woman behind the desk said, "Oh, Mr. Gill," she said, "we've upgraded 3 of you," which was Nicola and the 2 kids. And I thought there was something very delicately Arab about that.
Do you have a question?
I don't understand. Most of the pictures you got are reportage, like the snow stuff and the Darfur, but this one in particular, would you consider that as reportage or a setup, or were these kids playing cricket and you just
spotted.
Dropped him in? So are you a reportage photographer or are you a setup photographer?
That's a cardboard St Paul's, isn't
Well,
it?
definitely not a set-up photographer. This
You've been caught. You're just red-handed.
not at all.
That's
This
it.
scene was these guys were actually waiting for their school bus to take them to a cricket match.
And Adrian plays with them every Tuesday morning.
Make him do it.
No, they were genuinely playing cricket right there outside of St Paul's, and as is a particular pressure that I sometimes succumb to with the magazine, is that Adrian often needs to feature somewhere. So I'm sorry that I don't have the contact sheet to show you, but it starts off with this picture without Adrian in it, and then we kind of have a chat like, "Hey, why don't you ever go?" And then he had a go, and it turned out that the picture that I think has actually the best balance from this particular scenario has Adrian in it, and I think that it binds the kind of show together. There are a number of images in the exhibition that have Adrian in it.
But actually, it's funny you should say. But
Like a guy in the field from York.
Yeah.
You actually found him, but you had to put him in that.
I know. I didn't take him there.
He wasn't wandering about there. Was
Yeah, he was.
yeah, no, he was. He was part of they were showing us around. No, he
Because
really was.
They get a visitor once every year and a half to what is a porter cabin out the back of a pub, and they are the Towton Historical Society. And when they heard that some journalists were coming,
Picture, though.
well, there are those pictures exist too. But
But I think what you're getting at in your subtle and nuanced way is in itself the wrong question. That all photographs are setups.
Yeah.
That's what the frame is. That's what it is, and they are all a choice of moments. So in a sense, the great thing about Tom is that he chooses the moments that he does. But like the man in the bus station, one photographer in 1,000 would have seen that as a picture. But it ends up as a picture, and I think it's in the context. It was a really effective one. But we joke about that we're going to always travel with a broken dolly, and that someone, when it's particularly boring, will just chuck the doll on the floor, and it always makes a good picture. That, and then actually I saw there's one outside.
But the question becomes more convoluted because the world just looks more and more staged and strange anyway, particularly the kind of world you guys visit. No?
But I thought when you set it up, it said that you can't have all these set up pictures or the guy in the bus shelter, but when you put it together with a at there, right there, then it explains it a bit more, and then it becomes more poignant.
We can't hear that, sorry. We couldn't hear your question because I have the mic.
It wasn't very interesting.
This is an absolute extraordinary joy to have two talents in two different categories. One's a writer, one's a snapper. Sorry, Tom, for you not.
That's fine.
Not
You
really
didn't tell
a
me your
snapper.
mother was coming.
So I have two questions. No. I have two very simple questions to ask you both, which hasn't been addressed before. First, how in God's earth did the two of you get together? and why? And the second question is, what pleasures that you derive in working and collaborating together?
I dread to think. How
Sorry,
you're gonna answer
gentlemen.
this one.
Well, I think you probably have a longer list than I do. You go first.
We met on assignment. I was assigned to do the story in Chad. That was the first story we worked on. And I turned up to Heathrow, and there was Adrian sitting on his pile of bags, and that's how we met.
Pile of my one bag. You're the one who carries
Okay, bag. There you go.
58 bags.
And the answer to the second part of the question, what the pleasures or what's enjoyable about it or what kind of keeps it going, it's this sort of endlessly, quite brilliantly kind of curious process, in as much that I never ever know, exactly what we're looking for. I don't think Adrian does either. And so the restless process of being somewhere and just looking for something is always eventful in one way or another. And that particular process I could never ever tire of. That's great. It's at times inspiring, at times unexpected, always alive as an experience, There's sort of rarely a dull moment. And it's often quite a lot of fun, it's never long before I consider sort of how lucky I am to be in any one of these places. And also in one of these places, not just in a completely random or arbitrary way. I'm looking for something, and for me, I'm sort of squirreling around looking for a picture. And, that's a real challenge, It's not quite an adrenaline sport, but the closer you get to the end of an assignment and you know that you don't have a picture, the higher the stakes become. I'm still going to be getting on that plane on Tuesday. I still got to get something. And that is a game, and quite an enjoyable one in itself. And you roll all those things in, and it's something that I hope that I'm always going to be doing.
Yeah, for me, there was a long checklist of things that he wasn't. I have a very bad reputation. Well, just a bad reputation, but I have a bad reputation with photographers. I've left photographers on docks. I left them at train stations. I've gone off on stories without telling them where I was going. I have stand-up rows them. Most of the trouble I've had as a journalist with other journalists has been with photographers. And the great thing about Tom and going to Chad, which was a terrific story, was that we worked so obviously easily and well together. And you can sit opposite Tom, and he's got nice table manners. I cannot tell you how rare that is amongst photographers. I mean, it's, we call them monkeys. And we call them monkeys because they climb up things and you don't want to eat opposite them.
But you're only going with men. You haven't gone with women.
Well, I've also gone with lady photographers. But that came out all wrong.
Thank you for that.
But mostly it's because Tom and the other thing that photographers do is get you killed. And I don't want to be facetious about that. But photographers can take huge risks, and a man with a camera in a room changes the whole atmosphere in a room. And what you want more than anything else is a photographer who is aware of himself and his role in changing the dynamic of any place he's in. And that's rare. Photographers think they disappear behind cameras. And Tom never does. And he's always incredibly respectful of the people he takes pictures of. Really, always, invariably. Always ask them. Always make sure that he doesn't, if we're in Muslim countries, he doesn't just stick cameras in the faces of, women and...
Can you say a bit more about the rule of not separating? Because quite often I would imagine, because of people's suspicions and attitudes about photographers, a lot of journalists prefer to slip away from the photographer to...
No, I always worry I'm going to lose him. I'm going to find him in a pot. So, no, because that's how the story comes. I mean, we do talk about it all the time. And at the end of the day, when we go back to our tent or our boarding house or the hotel or wherever it is, we will always sit and go, and I'll always say, "What do you think you got?" And Tom will say, "I got 2 shots," and I go, "Oh, yeah, the boy on the wall and the woman selling bread." And so I know what he's taken, I know what's there. And it has become a sort of shorthand now. But mostly it's because we have fun together travelling. I mean, if this job isn't fun, why on earth are we doing it?
Sure.
And this is the best fun that I have.
Does any of your writing depend on having certain pictures there on the page? Where you're writing now?
Yes, it usually means there's less of my writing. I mean, that is then the fight at the end, which we haven't talked about, which is that I'm commissioned to write 3,000 words, I write 4,000. Tom's, there to take 6 pictures, and he takes 8, and something has to give.
It reminds me of James Agee working on Fortune, where whatever photographer he was with, even if it was Walker Evans, it would start off as a nice balanced photo story with the journalism, and then Agee's prose would go over like 8 or 9 pages at the end of the magazine because he just couldn't stop.
Well,
but yours don't do that so much. Yours is, there is a balance there.
Well, not according to Tom.
You don't think so?
I think there should be less words and more pictures.
Less is more. Thank you. I have to say to both of you, you just make, on a personal basis, my nose wriggle with extraordinary pleasure for how the two of you collaborate and work together in the most amazing way, coming from 2 different kinds of backgrounds that the wider public would perhaps perceive both of you. So I thank you for that.
Thank you.
I was just asking about the collaboration in general. For example, you said when you come back, you wait a couple of weeks before you actually write anything. Do you actually ever see any of Tom's pictures and use that as a kind of,
Yes.
gives you your memories back, and then you start writing?
I do usually at about the time I'm writing. Tom will send me over a sort of rough edit.
So you actually are sort of using that.
So I can see them, yeah, and also he'll tell me if there's anything that's particularly good that he particularly likes.
Is that on assignment as well? Like you sort of brought up, like, do you actually sort of discuss where you're going with it as you go along, and sort of
all the time.
You'll suggest, can you get some more
Yes.
pictures, and you
No, absolutely. No, I'll say I think that's important, or I think that isn't. I mean, that's the other thing of working often with photographers. If photographers have a story, a picture story in their heads, and that's what they're going to go and get. And I've been with photographers, I'm just going, you shoot what you like, that's not the story. That's never going to get printed. Because it's not going to be what's written about. And we have to talk about it all the time. But also, it's how I work out what the story is. I mean, Tom's as much of a journalist as I am. I mean, Tom will say, did you notice that, or isn't this amazing, or maybe we should go and look at that, or I mean, we work in tandem.
But part of the joy of the pieces is the humility of them, that you do get the sense.
I've never been accused of that.
No, I know,
before.
but don't be disingenuous. Don't be disingenuous about this, because what's happening when you read it is that you know that there are 2 guys there, and this is how it was for them. Nobody's trying to make anything definitive. It feels like a response.
I don't believe in definitive anything.
No.
I mean, there are no definitive. I mean, people say, "Oh, this is the definitive book," or "definitive nonsense." It's not.
Sure, but that illusion or delusion is out there a lot in journalism.
Yes, there's quite a lot amongst journalists.
I mean, just to add to that process of collaboration, because it is an interesting point and one that I think can be misconstrued. It's not like, hey, let's meet at 9:30 for a bit of breakfast, have a wander around the town, and then I've got to go and file some copy, or I've got a few phone calls to meet. Let's meet for a bite of lunch and then have another look for, 45 minutes. I mean, it's at daybreak it begins, and sometimes before.
Wouldn't that be lovely if it was like that?
And you're talking about a day of sort of 14, 15, 16 restless hours of moving. It's a very... I don't really know how it works, for all other collaborations. Unfortunately, the nature of this collaboration is massively diminishing, so there are less and less case studies. But it's physically, amazingly kind of demanding practice, especially because neither of us really know what it is that we're looking for. And if you roll into that from a photographic point of view, the fact that every single image you've seen tonight is shot on film, and all of them on either large or medium format cameras, I can't actually photograph everything. I just can't, because there's not the budget, there's not the sort of time to maneuver those, sort of pictures, to take those sort of images. And so there are moments when I have to use some kind of instinct to decide whether a scene is meaningful, and that comes from an ongoing conversation that I have with Adrian. And it's not a bit here and a bit there, it's absolutely incessant, from meeting at Heathrow to parting company at Heathrow, 5 days later, 10 days later, whatever it is. It's absolutely non-stop. And that is really it's not just rewarding, but it's very revealing, because you're continually scraping away at something in the hope that something else will be revealed. And the other thing that I haven't talked about this evening, that I've thought about a lot in the run-up to this show, is that my experiences on the ground are informed by other experiences that I've had in other countries. In doing the job, I suppose, we've both been lucky enough to go to lots of different places, and that you think you're forming an opinion about a specific country or a specific culture, but you may have arrived there that day. So the information that you're actually drawing on is information from other experience in other places. So the more you look and the harder you look, in every assignment it lends itself to a form of knowledge that gets rolled into the next one.
I think there is I just had I think that's all right, I agree with all of that, but I just had a footnote, which is that what we do does get rarer and rarer, because now most or a lot of journalists are expected to take their own pictures, is that we're all told to have phones that can take print-ready photographs. Photographers are also expected to file, elongated captions that can be turned by a sub into an article. And then there's everything that's happening on the internet, where everybody is a photographer and everybody is a journalist. And what you have is this babel of karaoke news. And I feel that, that we're like a Farrier and a Thatcher. We're doing two jobs that are from the last century, but they are what we do. That this is our craft, this is what we do. And I think that when we do it well, and we don't always do it perfectly, but when we do it well, I don't think there's anything else that can touch it.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely the point. I could just show you a set of images this evening, or indeed it could be a completely different kind of a talk, and Adrian could speak about his approach as a writer and show you some examples. I would urge you, if possible, to come and see the show next week, where you can read the full accounts and see some of the images. But the point is, if it works, and that's open for debate, and I believe it does, and when it does, surely it's something that we can all add in some way to preserve that practice. Because the point is, if it's replaced by a blogger or 10 bloggers, and I don't want to get too drawn into that line of discussion, it's a practice that goes away, and it never gets replaced by itself again. It gets replaced by something else. And once it's gone for good, it's going to be very hard to get back. And I believe it to be very important, really important, because the point of view of two people on the ground making a report, making a statement about any kind of place or culture and time, can be validated by two different points of view. And I think that in trying to describe this particular exhibition, I believe it to be a personal story told twice. And when they are rolled into one object, i.e. a report, I think that stands to have credibility, and the sort of credibility we need to have in our newspapers and our magazines more than ever, and that's how I feel.
It's a good place to stop. Tom, Adrian, thanks for sharing those stories with us.